The morning sun had just begun to filter through the tall trees outside the military hospital, casting long shadows over the courtyard. Inside, the corridors were quiet, save for the soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional footsteps of staff moving about. It was a place where stories of sacrifice, bravery, and pain lived within every brick. Nurse Sarah had been working at the hospital for over 7 years. She had seen it all: young soldiers returning home, broken from the war, old veterans with stories of courage and loss, families grieving for their loved ones who never came back. But Sarah wasn't just a nurse. She was a protector, a constant presence for those who had given so much. Her father, a decorated war hero, had passed on his values to her: the importance of serving others, standing strong, and never backing down. One chilly autumn afternoon, the quiet of the hospital was broken by the rumble of loud motorcycles outside. A group of bikers, rough-looking men with tattoos and leather jackets, pulled into the parking lot. They weren't regular visitors, and their presence immediately set the tone. Sarah had dealt with difficult patients before, but there was something different about these men. They weren't here for treatment or to visit someone. They had come to cause trouble. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek and a reputation for aggression, walked up to the entrance of the hospital, flanked by his friends. The sound of their boots echoed down the hallway as they made their way to the nurse's station. Sarah, standing at the desk, looked up and noticed them. She didn't flinch, even as they stared at her with an unsettling intensity. She'd worked with all kinds of people, but this was different. The leader of the group approached her with a smirk on his face, leaning on the counter. "So, this is where they send the heroes to rest, huh?" His voice was thick with mockery. "I bet you think you're doing something real important here, huh?" Sarah didn't blink. She had seen enough disrespect in her life to be fazed by his taunts. She met his gaze with a calm but firm look, the kind that only came from years of dealing with patients who tested her patience. "This is a military hospital," she said, her voice even. "It's a place where people who have fought for this country come to heal. You'd do well to show some respect." The biker's smirk deepened as he looked around, his gaze landing on the other soldiers and veterans who were sitting in the waiting area, all of them visibly tense. "Respect," he scoffed. "Why should I respect a bunch of old men and women who are just taking up space?" He turned to his group, chuckling. "Look at them. They've got nothing left to give. It's pathetic." Sarah felt the room grow colder, the tension palpable. She could see the veterans stiffen in their seats, their eyes narrowing. She wasn't just angry on her own behalf. She was angry for them, the men and women who had given their lives, their youth, and their dreams for a country that sometimes seemed to forget them. But Sarah wasn't about to let this biker or anyone else mock them. She stood tall, leaning forward slightly as she spoke, her voice gaining strength. "You don't know a damn thing about these people," she said, each word sharp and deliberate. "They fought in wars you've only read about. They've sacrificed things you could never comprehend. So before you start running your mouth, think about the cost of your freedom. Think about the price that was paid so you could ride around on your bike, free to do whatever you want." The biker's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly masked it with a scoff. "I don't need a lecture from a nurse," he said, stepping closer to Sarah. But Sarah wasn't backing down. "You might not want to hear it," she said, "but the truth is, you don't belong here. This is a place of honor, a place where people who have seen the worst of humanity come to heal, and you, my friend, are not welcome." There was a long pause. The room was dead silent. Even the other bikers, who had been laughing and talking among themselves, seemed to sense the shift in the air. The biker leader looked at Sarah for a long moment, And then something in his demeanor changed. The cocky grin that had been on his face melted away, replaced by a look of uncertainty. Sarah didn't wait for him to speak again. She turned to the veteran sitting nearby. "Mr. Thompson," she said, addressing a man in his 70s who had served in Vietnam. He was one of the toughest soldiers she knew, but his body had been worn down by years of combat and age. He had a cane that he used to get around now, but his spirit was unbreakable. "Would you like to show this man what respect looks like?" The biker's eyes widened as Mr. Thompson slowly rose from his seat, using his cane for support. The other veterans followed suit, some standing, some just sitting straighter, but all of them watching with quiet intensity. The biker was suddenly very aware of how out of place he was. His bravado was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that he was facing something much bigger than he had anticipated. Mr. Thompson walked over to him with slow but steady steps, his cane tapping lightly on the floor. When he reached the biker, he stopped and simply looked at him, his face stoic. Without a word, he reached up and placed a hand on the biker's shoulder, a simple gesture that carried the weight of decades of experience. The biker stared at the hand, his mouth opening but no words coming out. For the first time, he seemed unsure. "This place," Mr. Thompson said, his voice gravelly but strong, "is for people who have earned the right to be here. You haven't earned that." There was no anger in his voice, just a quiet, firm statement of truth. The biker stood there, stunned, and then, slowly, his shoulders slumped. He nodded once and turned, walking out without a word. His friends, seeing the shift, followed behind him. The room remained quiet for a moment, but then a quiet murmur of approval spread through the veterans. They didn't need to say anything. They had been seen, respected, and protected. And Sarah? She stood there, her heart pounding, knowing that she had done the right thing. She had stood up for them, for the men and women who had given everything, and she had made sure the world remembered that their sacrifice was not to be taken lightly. The bikers hadn't just learned a lesson that day, they had learned what it meant to truly respect those who had fought for their freedom. And Sarah had reminded them of that in the most powerful way possible.